And now we're up to Daf Zayin Omid Beis. The subject of the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Chacham is b'menuda ani l'cha sheni ochilcha. He uses a language of nidu. And at this point, the burden of proof is really in the court of Rabbi Akiva. Why would Rabbi Akiva say that the lashon of nidu is a lashon of neder? Rabbi Akiva savar lishna de niduya hu. Niduya means harchaka. When you put someone into nidui, it means you have to be marchik yourself from him, and other people as well have to be marchik themselves from him. But here in this case, he didn't mean that he wants to put the guy into nidui. He meant the essence of nidui, which is harchaka. That was his indication. That was his intention. And he meant to say that I'm accepting upon myself an iser to eat from my friend, to be marking myself from him as a neder. I'm not putting him into nidui. This is the language of nidui. When a person says meruchachni mimcha, that's one thing. That's called yad l'nedarim. But here he didn't say meruchachni mimcha. He said niduya. Niduya is a lashon of nidui and shamta. So there's no dibur of a neder. And even if you want to conclude that he meant to accept upon himself a neder of harchaka, to ask himself from eating to his friend, but he didn't use a lashon neder at all, and therefore it's mutter. All this is according to Rav Papa. But the Gemara says that this understanding of the machlokas between the Tanakam and Chachamim of Rav Papa, upliged Rav Chizda, is in contrast to the interpretation of the same identical machlokas according to Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda had a different approach to understand this machlokas. The Yahu Gavra, there was a story of a person. The Omer, he declared Meshamteno b'nichsei, to braid the Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. He accepts an Isser on himself in a language of Meshamteno, with regard to the possessions of the son of Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba. And also, the Kamid Rav Chizda, he came in front of Rav Chizda, this noder, to ask Rav Chizda whether the neder is cha. Amalei, Rav Chizda responded, lest the chashla lahad Rabbi Akiva. We don't accept the suffix of Rabbi Akiva. And in this case, we're going to paskin like the Chachamim lekula. Rabbi Akiva was machmir. We don't accept Rabbi Akiva against the majority. And we see here that this is a case of Meshamtana. According to Rav Papa in the previous sugya, Rav Papa declared that in the case of Meshamtana, even Rabbi Akiva was Mekil, because Meshamtana is clearly a language of Nidu. But Kasavar of Chizda, on the other hand, holds that for Meshamtana pligi, and Rabbi Akiva holds that Meshamtana, even though it's a Lashon Nidu, is a Lashon Neder. Because he basically said that I am like menuda from my friend. What he meant to say is he wanted to accept upon himself a prohibition, an Isur Neder, that he won't have any benefits from his friend. Just like everyone is Poresh min menuda, and therefore it's as if he said Mudrani mimcha, and this language of Mishamtana, at least according to Rav Chizda, in the framework of Rabbi Akiva, could be viewed and defined as a valid lashon neder. Chachamim, on the other hand, they hold that he didn't have kavanah. At least the language doesn't indicate that he wanted to create a kind of a nidui on himself to be oseres atzmo ba'adam michavero as a neder, but rather the kavanas halashon is nidui, because that's what the shamta is. Shamta is a nidui. Amarav Ilo Marav. Now, once the Gemara mentions menuda, now we get into the laws of nidu. The Rambam actually in Hilchos Talmud Torah dedicates an entire chapter to the laws of nidu. A lot of people wonder why the Rambam attached that to Hilchos Talmud Torah when the Rambam is very sensitive to the makom, to the place within the Mishnah Torah where he classifies the dinim. But the truth of the matter is that nidu is usually a punishment for someone who is chutzpahdik to a Talmud Chacham. And the Rambam has an entire chapter dedicated to Kavod Talmidei Chachamim And therefore, someone who violated and he was chutzpah and he undermined the covenant of a Talmid Chacham, he's chayav in nidui. So therefore, the Rambam codifies the laws of nidui at the very end, the last chapter in Hilchos Talmud Torah. Nido b'fanav. Okay. Now here's a case where Ruvain puts Shimon into nidui in the presence of Shimon. Now we have what's called hataras nidui, in which we remove the nidui. Later on, the Gemara is going to say that you can remove the nidui immediately after you put someone in nidui. We'll have to figure out why, but that's the law. Now, if, for example, Reuven, when he put Shimon into nidui, Shimon was there, he was present, and then Reuven was matir the nidui, and Shimon wasn't around. So Shimon is unaware of the fact that the nidui was lifted. And all of a sudden he looks around and he sees that people are coming close to him. He suspects them of violating nidui because he doesn't know that there was a heter on the nidui. It's therefore, says Rav Ilo in the name of Rav, ein matir lo el b'fanav. You cannot be matir that nidui unless Shimon is there, because otherwise Shimon is going to suspect others of being mezalzel in the nidui, in the violation of the nidui. And this comes under the general halacha of v'yisem nekiyim with Hashem Elokecha. Mishum chashada, we try to avoid any situation that might lead someone to suspect someone else of violating an Isur, which is very closely related to the general category called Maris Ayin, because if I see you eating milk at a fleshika table, when it's not really milk, but it looks to me like milk, right? It's cholav agozim, and you don't give me a simon, I suspect you of eating milk with meat together in the same meal. And v'yisem nekiyim, that's what Maris Ayin is all about. Nido shelo b'fanav. On the other hand, if Shimon wasn't even there, you could immediately be matir the neder even without the presence of Shimon. Matir lo bei b'fanav bein shelo b'fanav. Nobody's going to come to chashad because basically the menuda himself, Shimon, is not even aware of the fact that he was put into nidui. What generates nidui? When, under what circumstances is there a chutzpah, an avera that requires nidui? If you hear someone else reciting the name of God, the holy name of God, liv hatola, and you heard it mipi chavero, and let's assume that your friend did it with deliberate intention, with kavana, b'mezid, he really wanted to be mezalzel in the Shem Hashem, tzarech lenadoso mimlo nido hu atzmo yehiv nidu. Your obligation by hearing someone else enunciate the name of God deliberately, levatola, is to put him into nidu. If you don't put him into nidu, then you're like an accomplice to the crime. You're like agreeing to what he did, and you yourself deserve nidu. So there is a concept called a chiyuv nidu, and it is generated by the case of someone who violated the pasuk as Hashem Elokecha Tira in Dvarim Perek Yud, in which the Torah requires of us to have awe and reverence for the name of God. And if someone was irreverent to the name of God, he was pogea in the covenant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the great name of God with the capital N, the name of God, then you have to put him into nidui. And if you don't do so, you yourself deserve nidui. Now the Ran quotes a Gemara in Brachos on Daf Lamed Gimel that we extend this case of Shomea Haskaras Shem Mipi Chaver Levatola to a case of one who recited a bracha sheina tzricha, who violates a different law in the Torah of Lotisa Shem Hashem Elokecha L'Shah. And Rabbi Chai Goen and the Ramban al Torah, they write that if Mazkir Shem Shamayim Levatola over al Lotisa. So basically, there's Haskaras Shem Shamayim Levatol, and he violates Lo Tisa. And in the case of a bracha Shein Tzricha, again, it was deliberate, he violates Lo Tisa. That's why Suffolk bracha is Lahakil, because it's a Suffolk violation of Lo Tisa. And in the case where he's Motzi Shem Shamayim Levatola, that's a violation of Es Hashem L'Kechatira as well. Now the Gemara wants to know, why do we single out this violation of Azkaras Shem Levatola in such a way that was so machmir that even the person who hears it is worthy of nidu if he's shosek and he is silent? And the Gemara explains, Shekol Mokom Shazkaras Hashem Mitzuya Sham Anius Mitzuya. Whenever you have a situation of Hazkaras Hashem Levatola, then people get used to mentioning the name of God. The punishment for that is anius. And the anius, in a sense, sort of extends and encircles all the people who are around that situation of Azkaras Hashem Levatola. And how severe is anius? Anius kemisa. It's almost like a capital punishment. Shenemar, the pasuk says in the 4th chapter of Shmos, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe b'minyan lech shuv Mitzrayim ki mesu kol anoshim hamevakshim es nafshecha. Who are those people who died, and therefore Hashem calms down Moshe, doesn't have to worry about going back to Mitzrayim from Midian. Those are none other than Dasan v'Aviron. Those were the people who were malshin to Paro about Moshe that he killed the Mitzri. As long as they didn't die, Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid to go back to Mitzrayim. But Hashem says, Mesu kol anosh. They didn't really die. We find Dasan v'Aviram pop up again later on in Jewish history at the machlokas of Korach v'Dasan. So obviously they didn't die. So what does the pasuk mean when it says Ki Mesu kol anosh? And the answer is, Chazal understood al pitor shval peh, that it means Yardim Yinechseihem, they are no longer wealthy people, they are aniyim, and therefore the Torah calls them Mason. And we have to add the following, and I'm quoting here the Masifta, who in turn is quoting the Ran, that Lo Ayu Divrayim Nishmoy Meisel Paro B'nei Yardim Yinechseihem, all that political leverage, I say that on a day of election, right? Political leverage of Dasan v'Aviron is because they were wealthy guys. Wealthy people are always considered chashuv l'malchus. But once they became destitute, they no longer would have any impact on Paro, and therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu, you have no reason to fear returning to Mitzrayim. Now, the question here that the Mefarshim addresses, how does the Gemara know that they were poor? We have 4 cases and categories of people who are considered like they died. When the Torah says, Mesu kol anoshim, perhaps they didn't die, but they became mitzoroim, a mitzoros choshev kames, perhaps they became a suma, and a suma is choshev kames, or milei lo banim, if you don't have children, choshev kames. And there's a whole pilpul here, because to explain why we don't think they were sumin, for example, because in the Machlokas Korach it says ha'enei anoshim haim tenaker, they're not mitzoroim, because it says b'kerev kol Yisrael, and they weren't quarantined. We know that they had children, and therefore, by process of elimination, the only way we could call them Mesim, and they were certainly alive because they popped up at the story later on of Korach, is that they were Aniyim. So now that we've seen that Azkaras Shem Levatola is so severe that it generates Misa, meaning Aniyus, is therefore we conclude that even the person who passively did not put someone who was Maskir Shem Shemayim Vatala into nidui, he too will suffer a punishment, and he deserves nidui. Vesanya, and furthermore, we learned in the Brisa to prove that Anius is considered like Misa, Kol Makom She Nasnu Chachamim Eineim, when the Chachamim were makpid on a person for whatever violation he was guilty of, and they wanted to punish him. Oh, Misa Oni, either they gave him a whammy that he should die, or that he should become an ani, and an ani is choshev k'mes. But the bottom line is, we see that the Torah is very machmir for the onish of maskir shem shamayim levatala, because anius is the punishment which is chashuva k'misa, and the Rabbanan were therefore machmir in this avera above and beyond all other averas, and therefore if he didn't put him into nidu, he himself is roy limni. Rabbi Abba, in the Kamed Rav Huna, I was standing in the presence of Rav Huna, the Shamalach Isisa, and they heard a certain woman, the Afka is Karas Hashem Levatol. She deliberately and intentionally was Motzi Mipia, the name of Hashem Levatol. Shamta. And Rav Huna immediately put her into Shamta, into Ninui. And immediately in her presence, he was matir the nidui. Very strange. You put someone into nidui as a punishment for being motzi shem shemayim levatol, you immediately remove that nidui. Shma miniyot tlas. From this story that Rabbi Abba tells us, we derive three conclusions. Number one, Shma miniyot hashomei azkoras Hashem miti chaver tzarich lenadosa. As we said earlier, you have to put someone into nidui. That's why Rav Huna, having heard this woman being motzi shem Hashem levatoli, put her into nidui. Shmamina number two, he was makpid to be matir the neder immediately, so that should be befanav, and that is the principle that we learned earlier. Nido befanav e matir lo ela befanav. You can't be matir the nidui unless he's there, for the reason of chashad that we spoke about earlier. And a third conclusion is shmamina. There's no time lapse between nidui and hafara. Hafara means hatara. To be matir the nidui, you can do so immediately. You don't have to wait 30 days between the nidui and the hatara sanidui. Why? Because nidui is a kapara for the avera being motzi shem shemayim levatala. And the very fact that they scared him and they threatened him that they won't come anywhere near him because he's in nidui, that itself is going to have an impact on him, so that he won't be ragil b'kach, he won't be used to saying the name of God. And therefore it's enough that they put him into nidui for just one moment, and they immediately were made for the nidui, they were matir the nidui. Amrav Gino Amarav Talmud Chacham Benadal Liatzmo made for Liatzmo. Here's another din with regard to the laws of nidui. A Talmud Chacham can be menada himself. The truth of the matter is that it's lav dafka, say the Rishonim, a Talmud Chacham. Anyone could be madir himself. The reason why the Gemara uses the language Talmud Chacham is because for hataras nidui you need a Talmud Chacham. So a person would generally not want to put himself into nidui if he's not a Talmud Chacham, because he cannot be meifir and matir that nidui. Whereas a Talmud Chacham can be matir his own nidui for himself. And that's the chiddush of Gidol Marav, that the Talmud Chacham, like anyone, could be menad himself, but meifir liatzmo, the Talmud Chacham has a unique status in halacha with regard to nidui, that he has the power, the authority to be matir his own nidui on himself. And the reason for this is because Talmud Chacham eino nosei ponim liatzmo. It's not like he's trying to butter up, and sort of wash it away. That's called the siyas ponim. No. He's very serious, and he realizes that, whatever impact the nidui had to have on him to bring him to a state of kapara, he already achieved that state. Gemara says pshita. Why would I think otherwise? If a Talmud Chacham is not nosei panim liatzmo, then for sure he can be matir his own nidui. We have a principle of hapesh also hapesh iter, who also who matir. The Gemara says, we have a principle that someone who's locked up in jail cannot free himself from jail. He's incarcerated. He needs someone else to help him. He needs external help. So this person put himself into nidui. Now he's in a beis hasurim, which means that he's asur be'isur nidui. And therefore he himself cannot be matir his own isur nidui, kamashmal, and therefore Rav Gidol tells us that a Talmud Chacham can be matir his own nidui. What exactly is the case where the Talmud Chacham was matir his own nidui? And where answers kiha, like the story of the Marzutra Chasida. Ki mechayev bar beirav shamtif. One of the Talmidim in the yeshiva did something that was inappropriate behavior for which he's chayev shamto, which is nidui. Then what did Marzutra do? Mishamet nafshe bereisha. He would first put himself into nidui. V'hodar mishamet bar beirav, and then he would put this yeshiva bacha, who was guilty of inappropriate activity, into nidui. Why would he put himself into nidui first? So the Meiri says, one second, Mishum kavod Torah. In other words, this yeshiva bacha, bar beirav, is a Talmud Chacham. And to put a Talmud Chacham into nidui is not a simple thing. It takes a lot of audacity, a lot of what we call in Yiddish plaitzes. You know what plaitzes are. And therefore, he would do an act of humility first and humbly put himself into nidui, and then it would be less severe when he puts the Talmud Chacham into nidui. However, in the Masechet, he quotes Talmidei Rabbeinu Peretz and the Rosh and the Tos Yeshanim. They say, Kidei shelo yishkach lahatir hanidui. He only was menade himself, Marzutra, in order to use it as a memory device to remind him that it has to be matir the nidui. However, Tosfos offers another explanation. He was afraid that this act of bold, brazen audacity to put a Talmud Chacham into nidui would cause a punishment on himself, and therefore he himself self-accepted upon himself a nidui. And finally, the language of the Meiri is kedei l'shtatef b'tsar hamenuda. Right, this is what you call nosei v'ol im chavero. He wanted to be shtatef in the tsar of the nidui, of the menuda, and therefore he himself took upon himself a self-imposed nidui. And when Marzutra came home, shari lenafshe v'hoda shari le bar beirav. In other words, when he got home, he was matir the nidui for himself, the nidui that he accepted upon himself, and then immediately he was matir the nidui for that Talmud Chacham. Now, the Rosh asks the following question: why the sequence over here? Why did he first have to be matir himself before he could be matir bar beirav's nidui? And the Rosh answers: Kadeshi yovo zakai v'yatir zakai. A zakai, someone who's guiltless, has a clean record, he could be matir a nidui for someone who deserves nidui. Let's just learn a little bit further. Omar Rav Gidol Omar Rav, and here we turn to Daf Ches. How do we know that a person is allowed to take a valid shvur that's binding to fulfill a mitzvah? Let's say it's the night of Pesach, and he takes upon himself a shvur to eat matzah on the night of Pesach, or to sit in the sukkah on Sukkot, or he takes a shvur to take the lulav on Sukkot. Shenemar, because David Amel says in Tehillim, Nishbati v'akaimo lishmar mishpatei tzidkecha. I have taken upon myself a shvur which I will fulfill in order to fulfill the mishpatim of Hashem. So it means, according to the way the Gemara understands Rav Gidol, that he took a shvur, and it's a valid shvur to be Mekayim the mitzvahs. Now, normally we have a principle called Ein Shvur, Chalal Shvur. You can't take a shvur on top of a shvur. And any mitzvah, you're already considered Mushpa V'Yomei Me'ar Sinai. And that's the Gemara's kasha. At our Sinai, as the Gemara establishes elsewhere, V'Sech the Shvur Staf Chav Zayin, we took upon ourselves to be Mekayim the mitzvahs. Right, as it says in Yitzhak Es Asher Einenu Po'ayom. So once we're Mushpa V'Yomei Me'ar Sinai on all the mitzvahs, then we should activate the principle that Ein Shvur Chalal Shvur, because with regard to Korban Shvur in the parasha of Vayikra Hey, O Nefesh Kisi Shava Levatis V'Sayim Lahara Lehetiv. What does it mean Lahara Lehetiv? It means Lahara Lehetiv on a Davar Shal Rishus. He takes upon himself a shvur to eat something, takes upon a shvur to not to eat something, or to sleep and not to sleep. He's chayv korban shvur for violating that shvur. But in a mitzvah, where he's obligated to be mekayim it, he's already mushpa v'yom mi'ar Sinai. His shvur cannot be chal on top of the shvur. Ella says the Gemara, no. You misunderstood Rav Gidol. He did not mean that the shvur is binding. That's not what he derives from David HaMelech. It's not a shvua per se, it's only a zirus. He is giving himself an extra push, an extra motivation. He feels like he's a little bit weak about this mitzvah. He's not giving it his all. He's not waking up on time for davening, so he wants to push himself to get out of those warm quilts from under the quilts on a cold winter day. So a person could be absolutely kosher, but he's afraid that he won't have that motivation. So he takes upon himself a shvua, as we saw by David HaMelech, in order to prevent himself from non-fulfillment of a mitzvah. But it's not a real technical chal shem shvua. It's only a ziruz l'nafshe. He's only being mechazik himself with regard to the Kiyum HaMitzvah. So this is where we're going to stop for today. And we're up to another statement of Rav Gidol Amarav here on the top of Daf Ches Lamed. So I will wish you a wonderful day and a successful exercise of your civic responsibility.